Little friends, this is our last week of school. Oh gosh, can you believe we've been away from each other for so long? Well, today I have a story written by Miss Tommy Townsley, who lives right here in Southwest Louisiana. And her story is about Amos the alligator, and it's illustrated by Ann Dentler. So let's see what we have to learn about Amos. I think I left out a word. The artistic alligator. So artistic is someone who's very good at art. It was a dark and dreary night in the Atchafalaya swamp. Old Mr. Homer was in his swamp shack fixing his supper. He was very hungry and grouchy. Mr. Homer had a pot of hot, steaming crawfish, spicy potatoes, and corn to eat. He had a very hard day and was looking forward to eating his supper and then going to bed. Mr. Homer was tired after a long day of looking for the perfect alligator to be placed in the Audubon Zoo in New Orleans, Louisiana. An alligator named Amos lived in the swamp near Mr. Homer's swamp shack. Every day, Amos swam around, searching for food and watching Mr. Homer. Amos knew what Mr. Homer was up to, so he stayed underwater for the most of the time. Amos floated motionless for hours. He looked like a drifting log. Amos loved to swim gracefully, using back and forth movements of his tail. He thought he was the smartest alligator in the Atchafalaya swamp. Although Amos was only 5 years old, he was 6 feet long and weighed 200 pounds. Amos had a very small friend named Bud the bullfrog. Bud always plopped himself between Amos's eyes because that is where he felt safe. Bud was scared of Mr. Homer too. He knew if Mr. Homer ever caught Amos, he would catch him too. Amos and Bud floated along the swamp, spying on Mr. Homer, eating his crawfish and listening to his radio. But Bud croaked, "Amos, let's not get too close to that man's shack. We had better go close to the bank over there behind that big tree." Behind the tree, they both fell asleep for the night. Do you see that? The next morning, they awoke to a beautiful sunrise. Amos swam up on the bank. He wanted to bask in the sun for a while before heading back deep into the swamp. Bud jumped off Amos's head to catch a buzzing mosquito for breakfast. Amos just enjoyed the sun's rays beating down on his back. Bud asked, "Amos, do you want to make another mud animal?" Amos said, "Yes, let's make a mud alligator." Amos slowly backed up into the water. He took his front leg and began to dig a small hole in the mud. Amos started pulling some thick clay, broken twigs, and mossy grass out of the hole. He said, "We can build the alligator right here on the bank." Look, they have another friend that joined them too. Do you see right there? A turtle. "Amos, how can I help?" croaked Bud. "Well, you just hop in the hole and pull out as much grass as you can," said Amos. "I'm gonna move some of the mud with my snout to form a big pile." Bud and Amos continued digging and making a big pile of mud, grass, clay, and twigs on the bank. The bank is the edge of the river or the bayou. They noticed a turtle nearby watching them. He was sunning himself on a big log. Amos said, "Do you want to come help us?" The turtle stuck his long neck out and replied, "Sure, I'd love to dig in the mud and sleep on the logs. My name is Boxer. What's your name?" "My name is Amos. This is my friend Bud who lives on lily pads. We are going to create something right here on this bank. This is our favorite spot in the swamp." Suddenly, they heard a loud noise headed toward them. It sounded like a big fan blowing the water in a swirling motion. Amos said, "Come on, let's all go get in the water. It looks like that mean man in the boat is looking for us again." Oh dear. Oh, look, the turtle jump. Amos slowly backed himself into the water. All you could see was his big round eyes. And of course, Bud was riding along his head. Boxer decided to go all the way under the water because he was scared. They started moving away from the bank into deeper water. Mr. Homer's boat was approaching the bank very quickly. He grabbed his binoculars from around his neck and looked through them. He said in a gruff voice, "There's something on that bank that looks very suspicious. It looks like that alligator may have been here. I bet he is digging himself a gator hole to live in. And I think I will hang around for a little while just in case he shows up." Mr. Homer is riding in a big fan boat that they use in the bayous. Mr. Homer turned off his boat motor and waited for Amos. While Mr. Homer waited, he tried to catch some fish. Unfortunately, he did not catch any fish, nor did he see Mr. Amos. Did he see Amos? Mr. Homer started his boat and moved to a different location in the swamp. After he was out of sight, Amos, Bud, and Boxer went back to the bank where they had been digging. Amos said, "Whoa, what a close call. If that man sees us, we are off to the zoo." "We have to finish what we were doing on the bank," said Amos. "I think I have a good plan to avoid being captured." As they arrived at the spot where they were digging, Bud hopped off of Amos's head and said, "Ribbit." Bud. To Bud, that meant, "Okay, let's get started." Amos, Bud, and Boxer started digging again, pulling out as much clay and twigs as they could. Amos would pull the mud with his claws. Bud would hop on and pack it down with his big feet. And Boxer, he'd smooth it out with the bottom of his shell, as though he was dancing. It started to get dark, and Amos was hungry. He said, "I am going to find something to eat. Look over there. It's my supper. A snake is right over there." Amos swam toward the snake and snatched it up really fast. Boxer enjoyed several minnows on the bank. Those are little fish. While Bud found himself an interesting bug. In the meantime, Mr. Homer had gone back to his old swamp shack for the night. He was very mad because he did not see Amos all day. He felt like his alligator hunting days were almost over because his eyesight was not as good as it used to be. Amos decided to swim near Mr. Homer's shack to see what he was doing. And as he got closer, Amos lifted up his head and stared at the brightly lit porch. He could see several fishing poles, an old broom, a broken swing, a couple of rusty tin buckets, some torn nets, and a long rope. Cautiously, Amos drifted into the water and made his way back to his safe spot. He found the spot where he and Bud and Boxer had been digging and decided to continue with his artwork. Amos worked all night, building what he thought would save them all from Mr. Homer. After the fog lifted, the next morning, Amos noticed a beautiful bird singing in the mossy tree. It was a red bird, chirping away while he watched Amos dig in the mud. Amos knew he was going to have a good day because red birds are special. Do you know what that red bird is called? It's a cardinal. Amos was getting very tired, but he hopped over to Amos and said, "It looks like you're almost finished with your work." "Wow, it looks like you. You're such a talented artist." Amos replied, "This is a big old bull gator. This gator's gonna scare that mean man. All this gator has to do is to dry in the sun today, and he'll be ready to fool him." After Amos finished the mud alligator, he fell fast asleep. He had a bad dream about Mr. Homer trapping him and taking him to the zoo. At sunset, they heard a boat in the distance. Amos and Bud quickly got into the water. Boxer decided to swim far away. "Bud, hop on my head and tell me what you can see," said Amos. "You have very good eyesight." "Oh my gosh, here comes the man in his boat," cried Bud. "Under the water we go," said Amos. Well, Mr. Homer was very excited as he got closer to the bank. "Yes, I'm finally going to catch that alligator. He's even bigger than I thought." He laughed and laughed. Mr. Homer threw his rope out of the boat and looped it around the gator's neck and gave it a tug. "What in the world?" said Mr. Homer. "It looks like an alligator, but it's made out of mud. I've never seen anything like that in my life. Who could have made something like this?" he thought out loud. He shook his head back and forth, saying, "My eyes are really bad. I'm too old to do this anymore." He started his boat and headed straight back to the swamp shack. Amos felt brave and swam closer to Mr. Homer's pier and then let out a big hissing roar to tease Mr. Homer. Mr. Homer walked out on his pier. "Alligator, where are you? I hear you," he said in a loud voice. Amos lifted up his head and smiled. Mr. Homer backed up when he saw all of Amos's teeth. He glanced over the edge of the pier. Amos, Bud, and Mr. Homer looking straight at each other as if they were frozen. Mr. Homer said, "Howdy there, look at you. I never thought you could smile. I guess you're not as mean as I thought you were. By the way, big alligator, did you try to scare me today with that big alligator made out of mud?" laughed Mr. Homer. Amos gave another loud roar. Mr. Homer said, "I will take that as a yes. You know, alligator, you are very smart. I like you. Did you know I was going to trap you and take you to the Audubon Zoo in New Orleans?" Amos answered by slapping his tail on top of the water. Mr. Homer said, "Well, I don't think I'm going to make you go to the zoo. I can tell you are perfectly happy right here in the swamp. You see, we both love this swamp. It is our home. I believe we should both respect each other's home." Amos looked at Bud and smiled. He said, "You know, buddy, I'm very happy here, and I always wanted to be with my friends. Friends are very special to me because they help one another, just like you and Boxer helped me." Now, I have made another friend. Mr. Homer, huh? Mr. Homer waved goodbye to Amos and Bud. He said, I will see you later, Alligator. You are my scaly new friend. He threw Amos some of his fish that he had caught, and Homer yelled, I hope you enjoy these good old Cajun fried fish. They are very good. The end. C'est tout. That means the end in Cajun French. Oh, sweet little story. They all ended up becoming friends. That was a long one. That was a good story, huh? Well, my friends, goodbye to you. I love and miss you bunches. Bye-bye.